Okay, hi again, everyone. It's Emma here at Function Point. Thanks so much for joining in the session today. Today is going to be all about tracking expenses and expense reporting. We're probably going to go, Mark tells me, about 30 to 45 minutes. I will be here to answer questions, so feel free as we go along here to type questions. You should see a little question area on the GoToWebinar dashboard, and Mark's going to be presenting. So I'm just going to take us through a little bit of an agenda, and then we'll pass the reins over to Mark. Today, we're going to be reviewing the kinds of expenses you can add to your system, how to create POs and enter vendor invoices, and how to pull reports on job-related expenses. Mark, have I got you there?
Yes, you do. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little quiet, but I'm sure that may be me. I'm not sure.
Okay. You know what?
Oh,
This headset's actually, but people have been telling me I'm a bit quiet, so I'm going to move it closer to my mouth and speak up a bit.
fantastic. Well, now you sound clear as a bell. So what I'm going to do, if you're ready to go, I'm going to make you the presenter here. Just give me a moment, and then you can take us through the information. Now, was there anything else you wanted me to review in the agenda, or did I cover everything there?
No, I think we're good. Let's jump in.
Fantastic.
So let's see here. You should be able to see my screen, and I should be putting my cursor over the demo item there. Are you able to see that okay?
Oh, yeah, good as gold.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining in today. I'm looking forward to taking you all through the webinar on expenses and entering expenses and reporting on those expenses. And just a few things to remind everyone. As always, please do feel free to ask questions using the GoToWebinar question panel or box or whatever you want to call it. Type those questions in. Emma will answer them via text or in one of my check-ins with her. She may ask me to review a question on screen or review an answer to a question on screen, which I'll be happy to do if we can, based on the timing and also the subject matter. If it's something that we may need to defer to follow up or another session that's more personal to yourselves to answer the question, then we'll let you know and may defer the answer to another time. And yeah, you know, as Emma mentioned, I'm going to try to keep this to about half an hour, 45 minutes, but I have a tendency to go over. I'm going to try not to do that today, so I apologize in advance if I do, but I don't think that I will. One thing I want to do is give a bit of a shout out to all of our American friends that are joining in today. Congratulations on your soccer team advancing to the group of 16 in the World Cup. No one thought that you guys could do it, including the German coach of the American team. So he kind of had to eat his words when you guys had advanced and congratulate his own team, which is awesome. So I'm not a huge soccer fan myself, but I was stoked to see the Americans move on, and I'm really looking forward to watching them play in the round of 16. So congratulations to you all. And oh, you know what? I really hope I didn't just spoil something for people. If you had a PVR or something like
Oh,
that, if
Mark.
I did, I apologize. But I mean, it's all you can't open up a web browser right now without seeing that. So
Oh, I don't know, Mark. We're getting a lot of angry messages.
if
No,
you were
just kidding.
PVRing that with the intention of going home to watch it, and you have internet access, good luck because you're going to see it anyways. But no matter what, anyways, congratulations. So let's jump in. So the purpose, you know, the topic of today's webinar is expenses, and first we're going to be covering the entry of expenses. And basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, starting off, just the entry of a really simple expense into a job in Function Point. And in the first example I'm going to show you, it's going to be the entry of an expense that's, you know, it may or may not have been estimated on the job. I'm just entering an expense against a job in Function Point. Easy, no problem. The next thing I'm going to show is entering an expense that was estimated on the job and how that relates. And then the final thing I'm going to show around that specific way of expensing is a more detailed, thorough PO process that you may wish to use in your agency, depending on you know, the type of POs you need to produce, and if you know, this kind of more thorough process is something that would be important to you. I'm also going to talk a little bit about insertion orders. I'm not going to go much into it. It's going to be covered just by going through the other expenses anyways. And then any other types of questions that come in. From there, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some ways of reporting on expenses, and that's going to be mostly through find routines and customizing the columns in the resulting list views, and then producing reports on those. And then, again, answering any questions that I can that arise from reviewing that. So let's jump in. So the first thing I want to show, really simple, is let's add an expense to a job. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor over the expenses module. You notice it's broken down into two sections, external and internal, and I'm going to choose to add an external expense. That's going to bring me to our multi-line expense entry. Now this is a multi-line system, so if you're adding multiple line items from the same vendor, you can add those line items in. You can also drag and drop them and put them in the order that you wish. In this case, we'll just put in one. I'm going to choose my supplier. In this case, I'm going to say I'm working with a company called Triple Line Interactive. Perhaps doesn't matter really what I needed to do for me. I'm just putting in a simple expense. The description up at the top here is the memo description. If you happen to be using QuickBooks and you have the system integrating with QuickBooks, this is going to go into the memo description in QuickBooks. Even if you're not using QuickBooks, this is still relevant because this is the overall description of the entire expense. As I mentioned, this expense may have multiple line items. The lower description box is the description of that line item, the actual thing that's being purchased. This is the overall expense description. Sometimes I see this being left blank, other times it's filled in, it's up to you. The reference number is often the invoice number provided by the vendor. That's typically what it is. It's not a required field because you might not have an invoice number at the time of entering this. In this case, we'll say we do. Maybe it's like INV89, just as an example. Leave the field, it'll update that. I'm then going to put in the details of my expense. So job, what is this for? I have a job in my system called Summer Brochure that I'm going to be using for a lot of things today. Type in part of the job name or use the magnifying glass. Service group. What is the service group structure of this particular job? I have one called expenses. If you didn't, if it was all under one service group, no problem. Just select the category that it's going into. The items you see here are specific to the job that we selected. Choose expenses. Choose my expense type. Now the asterisk that you see there is letting us know that this job that we selected has expenses that were estimated. When we then select the expense type, we're going to see a list of all of our expense types, and if any values were estimated, it's going to let us know what the estimated value was. Now the estimated value that you see here is the post-markup billable estimated amount on the job. But I'm not going to choose either of these right now. I'm going to choose, let's say we needed to hire an outside freelancer or contractor for some production work, just as an example. If you are using QuickBooks, the cost of goods sold should automatically fill in. If it doesn't, and you are syncing with an accounting system, whether it's QuickBooks or something else, you'll need to select the appropriate item there. The description. This is the specific description of the item being purchased. Now you can right-click your spelling mistake, which is always useful for myself. We can then enter our values, quantity and rate. Maybe we had to hire an outside production person, and they worked for us for 5 hours, and they're charging us $80 an hour. Track any discounts we're getting, any tax groups that are applicable for this purchase. This should represent your tax structure for your company. Tip related to things like travel, meals, things like that. The markup percentage fills in automatically based on the expense type and the rate category that is related to the job that we're adding the expense to. As long as you have your markup set up in the admin section, this should fill in for you automatically, but we can override it. We can override the percentage, or we can override the total dollar amount that will be the billable amount. Bill to job, this value represents the amount that is billable on the job. So if you wanted to eat this expense, you might put in 0 here. You might put in a billable amount but never bill it. The point is this is the billable value on the job. The checkbox here that says billed, very, very common question. What does this mean? What does this represent? If this is selected, that's basically implying that you've already invoiced the client for this. A scenario for that might be, you're doing a job for a client and it's a rush job, and you tell them, what, this job's going to be $10,000. There's going to be a $1,000 expense on it, and I'm going to bill you for all of that right up front. Or perhaps you're telling the client it's going to be $10,000, but you happen to be outsourcing some of it, but you don't want the client to know that you're outsourcing some of it. As far as the client's concerned, it's all internal agency services. But this is actually an outside production expense, and you invoiced the client for 100% of the job up front, maybe because it was a rush job or something like that. The point is that clicking this checkbox is telling the system, I have already invoiced the client for this expense. Most of the time, you're going to leave that unselected. But if you've already invoiced the client for it, you'll want to click on that. The last thing I want to show here is the quoted for PO field. The quoted for PO field controls the dollar value that will show up on the vendor-facing purchase order. So in this case, it is our $400 that we're purchasing. $400 is the quoted for PO amount that will show up on the vendor-facing purchase order. Click Save. That is our expense created. Up at the top, we can choose to produce a printout. There's a few different printouts we can produce here. One is a purchase order, standard purchase order layout and structure. If you want to customize this, of course you can in your admin section under printing preferences. Just like estimates, invoices, and a lot of others, there's a lot of options to customize the look and feel, terms and conditions, and so forth, and that is found via printing preferences in the admin section. Notice the description, and then our price. That's some of the basics. We're going to continue on this vein, but Emma, I just want to check in. Any questions so far?
Hey, Mark. No questions so far, which is okay, but everyone, as Mark said, do feel encouraged to type in. There really are no goofy questions. We're happy to answer them.
Okay, no problem. So that is an example of entering just a simple expense against the job. And notice I didn't have to go anywhere in the system. I just selected to add an expense and basically just filled out all the fields. For the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. The next thing I'd like to show is if we're entering an expense for a job, entering an expense that was estimated on a job. Now I can do that via the exact same process I just did. Add an expense, choose my job, well it's the summer brochure, and it's going against my expenses category. And I can see here that we have, let's say, photography, or let's say photography, $600 estimated. Or in fact, I'm going to use printing. So printing, $1,200 estimated. So I can select that, and I know that I have $1,200 that's estimated for this expense. So we can do the exact same process, expenses, add expense, using the system's main navigation bar. Another thing I'd like to show is if we go into the jobs details page and look at the financials tab. So jobs details and financials, we're going to see, and actually I wanted to use that summer brochure here as an example. Let's actually pull that up here. So here's that summer brochure that I wanted to use as an example. So if we go to the jobs details page and look at the financials tab, what we'll see is our expenses. Now notice that I have photography and printing. Both of these were estimated. The production was not. The production estimate value is 0, but there are values in the actuals. 5 quantity, $400 is our cost, $480 is the post markup billable value to the client. It's $480 more than the value of the estimate, which is 0, and we have not invoiced for any of it yet. Therefore, for our expenses, we're currently out $480. Now we have a photography item here, $500 estimated, $600 post markup billable value. Notice on the far right there is a plus icon. If I click on the plus icon, it brings me directly to my multi-line expense page and fills out a lot of the information for me. It fills out my job, my expense, puts in the quantity and the rate. This is the exact same thing as simply choosing to add expense and then filling in all the information manually. The only difference is that because we navigated to the job and did it from there, it fills in a bunch of the data for us. I then simply choose my supplier. I might say, show me all of my photography suppliers. I think I only have one. If I had multiple, I'd see a list. Since I only have one, when I leave the field, it just fills in. James Boyd, photography. If there's a reference number, I'll fill it in. Again, it's not a required field, but I can put that in there. We have the memo description. We have the quota for PO. It's $500. We have the description of the expense. In fact, I'm going to put in a quick description of the expense. We then have our quantity and rate. Maybe it was actually 2 days at $250. It's telling me that I have 2 times $250, $500. Keep in mind that $600 was the estimated billable value. Track any tax groups, tips. The markup percentage fills in this case, based on the estimate, what was estimated. It was a $600 markup. That's 20%, or sorry, $600 billable value. That's 20% markup. So, I'm just filling in the description and choosing my supplier here. That's it, because I clicked on the plus icon from the Financials tab. Save that, and that's my expense created. Now, if you need to produce this and to give it to somebody in your office, and I was working with an agency recently, and their process right now is basically the project managers are creating expenses and then giving a piece of paper to somebody who needs to approve that. They prefer having the piece of paper there, so no problem. You can produce a external expense list document right from here, and it's just showing us high-level detail. What's the job? What's the type of expense? Who's the supplier? And what's the value? Really, really simple stuff. The next thing we're going to take a look at is a more thorough purchase order process. Before we do that, I just want to check in. Emma, any questions at all?
Oh, hey, Mark. Thanks for asking. Rhonda had reached out with a question that you might be able to back me up on the advice I gave her, or maybe give different advice. She was asking a little bit about those expenses being approved, and something I know I've spoken to clients about before. It's the idea of moving that, someone getting alerted that an expense has been created, and then maybe changing the status to posted as like a sort of pseudo approval routine. Is that something you would also advise?
Exactly. If you'd like, depending on how you have your alerts set up, the system can automatically email somebody based on the creation of an expense. If you have an alert going to somebody based on the creation of an expense, they can then click on the link in the email. It'll bring them to this page. And then the posting option is typically an approval process. Once something is posted, that is then telling me that this is approved. Now, a question I had was, well, if it gets posted, will that then email the person who originally created it? And the answer to that question is, unfortunately, I don't know. I know that there is an alert for expenses being updated, but I don't know if posted counts as updated. I am going to have to check on that, but that is the process as far as approving this, is posting the item.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And Rhonda, let us know if that doesn't fully address the question, but thanks, Mark. That's great.
No problem. So that's really the kind of the basics here. We're choosing to add an expense, and we can do that from here or from the Jobs Financials tabs, and it's accomplishing the same thing. We're filling in all the fields. We're then producing either a purchase order or an expense list PDF. You can also produce a request for quote, although that's something I typically don't find our system used all that often for. You can produce a request for quote if you wish. The next thing I'd like to show is a more detailed purchase order process. Now, let's say that we want to submit a purchase order to our vendor, but we don't really know what the final invoice amount is going to be. We also haven't received an invoice yet, and we do not want a value showing up on the job as a billable expense that's come in that hasn't been invoiced yet. We only want to do that once we get the invoice from the vendor. So this is a more detailed workflow process. What I might do is either from the Jobs Financials tab or simply by choosing to add an expense. I'm going to fill in not all the fields here. I'm going to choose my supplier. Let's say I'm purchasing some printing for my summer brochure from Starboard Custom Printing. Reference number, I don't have that yet. I do not have a reference number yet. Again, the memo description, choose our job. Well, it's our summer brochure. It's going against our expenses category, and we are purchasing some printing. So we're purchasing some printing. We've estimated $1,200 as the billable value. Let's say I know I need, 1,000 quantity at $1 a piece, just to make my math simple. So I need 1,000 quantity at $1 a piece. So what I might do here is say, well, I plan on purchasing $1,000 worth of printing, and I need, 1,000 copies, center fold, full color, and et cetera, et cetera. So all the detail that you need there in the description. I'm going to leave the quantity and the rate fields blank because I don't know that yet. Maybe the vendor comes back and the value is different, or maybe I just don't want that value showing up on the job. So I'm going to leave all of this information blank and click Save. Even though the information here is blank, because I have a description and a quoted for PO amount, I'm able to produce my vendor-facing purchase order. And here we have, our 1,000 copies, centerfold, full color, et cetera, for $1,000. It's a purchase order, and it's going to Starboard Custom Printing, and it's PO 59. When I look at my jobs details page, so if I were to navigate to the jobs details page and look at the financials tab, we're going to see some differences here. Notice our photography item. This is, PO 58 on the 26th of June. Mark Wilson entered it with James Boyd Photography. 500 estimated cost, 600 estimated billable value. The actual is then 2 units at $500, marked up to $600. It matches the estimate exactly. Here's the description of the expense. We have not invoiced for it yet. That is the balance outstanding in total for the expenses. Look then at the printing item and notice the difference. Printing estimated 1,000, marked up to 1,200. Notice the red zeros here. The tooltip is letting me know that I have a purchase order out that's quoted for $1,000. If I click on the arrow here, it's going to show me that PO 59, entered on the 26th of June by Mark Wilson to Starboard Custom Printing, does not have any dollar values yet, but we're purchasing 1,000 copies, centerfold, full color, et cetera, and it's quoted for $1,000. So that's showing me that there's an outstanding purchase order. Let's say that I'm off somewhere else in the system. So I'm off, taking a look at my tasks and to-dos page. And I get an email, and it says, here's an invoice for PO 59. So I'd say, okay, well, PO 59. I'm going to do an expense find, and I'm going to search for PO 59. Click find. I just got an invoice for $1,000. Here is my summer brochure expense. It's printing. $0 the billable value so far. Let's take a look at it. Here I can see it's 1,000 copies, centerfold, full color, and it's quoted for $1,000. PO 59 for Starboard Custom Printing, and I just got an invoice from them for $1,000. I'm now going to choose to edit this expense. It was, invoice number 93. Enter my memo description, and then enter my values. There's 1,000 copies at $1 a piece. Track any discounts we're getting, tax groups, the markup percentage fills in. Override it if I want, but so far everything looks good. Click Save, and that is now my expense entered as far as having the vendor invoice and putting the actual expense against the job. This item was red a minute ago. When I go back to my jobs details page and look at my financials tab, notice that in our expenses that we now have values in the actuals columns. And it happens to match our estimate exactly. We have not invoiced for any of it yet. So that's the process for entering in those expenses. Any questions come in at all that I can address at this time?
Hey, Mark. No, we haven't had any questions about that. That's really cool. That's something I actually didn't even observe before in my navigating around. So you're teaching me stuff.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. So I'm going to cover a couple things really quickly here on the entry of expenses. I mean, that's really the basics of it so far. There isn't really much more to it. I do want to mention a few other things. One is insertion orders. Function Point isn't really a media system, and what I mean by that is that it's not going to be a replacement for a program like Strata or SmartPlus. I mean, this is not a media planning and scheduling system, but it does allow you to track the cost of the media to make sure that you're invoicing your client. And really, the insertion order is exactly the same as the expense. The difference being that you have some extra fields around the issue date that it needs to go out, the caption that's going out with it, and the size of the ad. And these are all going to show up on the insertion order. And if I were to fill this out and hit save, that button that says print, instead of it saying produce purchase order, it would say produce insertion order. And the PDF is going to say insertion order instead of purchase order. The next thing I want to touch on really quickly is the fill expense form. The fill expense form, the most common usage of this is when you have a staff person entering in a bunch of expenses for a bunch of different jobs from a bunch of different suppliers. And even a common way of doing this is if the supplier is themselves. If they have, let's say there's 3 expenses that they've purchased, and they're needing to submit their expenses. So they might come in here, and let's just say for time's sake, there's 2 line items. So the first one is going against that summer brochure, and the second one is going against a job called biz cards. And the first one here, well, the supplier is me. The reason that I'm the supplier is because I just had a cab ride. Now, if you want to have the supplier be Beck's Taxi, no problem. But an easy way of managing staff-related expenses is having the staff person as the supplier. I'm going to put this against our expenses, and we'll say that this was some travel, and it was a travel to client site, and it was a cab ride. It was one cab ride. It cost me $35, and I tipped the driver $5, and we're not going to mark that up to the client at all. We just want them to pay for it. The next thing was the biz cards, and the supplier here was actually Starboard Custom Printing, because I went over there and I purchased those business cards, and I was the one that purchased it from Starboard. So I'm going to then say, well, this was going against our expenses. I think there's actually a printing category for this guy, and I was purchasing some printing, and I just went over there and I purchased 700 items at $1 a piece. Now you could actually even put in myself as the vendor, because perhaps I'm the one that needs to be paid, and it's $700 purchased from Starboard. So I was the one that bought it, so I'm the person that needs to be paid, so therefore I'm the vendor on both of these. One was a cab ride, the other was some printing, and the printing is being marked up, but the cab ride isn't. So the staff person entering in my expenses. Save this, and then up at the top I can choose to produce a expense list, and then provide this to my boss. And in fact, actually, a more common way of doing that, and this is a perfect segue into the reporting topic, is doing an expense find. Is a more common way, because you may not have all of your expenses entered in one go. You might have entered a whole bunch of different expenses, and you need to produce a report to show what you need to be paid. As that segue, let's now jump into expense reporting. One last check-in before we do that. Emma, any questions before we take a look at the reporting?
No, we don't, Mark. And just wanted to sidebar for a second. What Mark's been reviewing, we do have documents on all of these topics as well, and we also are recording today's session. Just wanted to chime in with that. So in case anyone was like, "Oh, I desperately want to watch this again," or "Where can I read more about this?" Those materials are available.
Okay, great. So I'm going to show you 2 different types of things here. The first is I'm going to show you an expense find. And really quickly, let's just say, well, I want to do an expense find where I am the supplier, and then find those external expenses. Here they are. And then perhaps I want to show what is the cost value of these expenses. So I'm going to manage these columns. I'm going to take out the billable value, and I'm going to put in, let's see here, our actual total cost. I'm going to maybe take out the edit option. I don't really need status. Take that out too. Everything else looks good. Save that. There's our total cost. Produce my PDF. And here's my expense form that I can then send to my boss for the $735 that I'm out on expenses. On that same topic of doing an expense find, let's say I want to look at something different. I want to look at all of the expenses for the month of, well, let's say from May until now. I want to look at everything from May until now, and I want to know, has it gone to accounting to pay the vendor? Has the client paid us? What's the value of the expense? And what's the status? So I'm going to do an expense find, and I'm going to say, show me all the expenses from May 1st until today. I want to see all the expenses from May 1st until today. Now I can narrow this down by all the expenses that are not billed, or by a certain type, or by a certain supplier, or by a variety of other things. But I just want to see from May 1st until today. Find expenses, and then let's customize those columns again. What do I want to see in this report? Well, I want to see the status, and I want to see the supplier. The type, maybe that's important to me too. Nothing else here is though. The company, what client is it for? We'll leave that in there too. Maybe I just need the job name. I don't care about the number. I don't care about the project either. I just want the job. we'll then take a look. What else do we got here? So let's take a look. Quantity, we don't need the quantity, but I want to know the invoiced amount. Have we invoiced for it? The billable amount, how, is it, what's the billable value? Whether or not it's been billed, well, that's going to be determined by these two values, but we'll keep that in there too. And then everything else looks good. Let's then order this appropriately. So I'm going to take the status here. I'm going to move it over beside supplier. We're then going to have, well, I don't need the actual total cost. Let's take that out there as well. I want the billable value, the invoiced amount, whether or not it's been billed. Save that. There we go. Looking at this on screen, I can see the client it's for, the job it's for, the type of expense, the supplier, the status. The status is posted, unposted, or exported. If it's exported, that's letting you know it's gone into your accounting system, and therefore the assumption is that it's paid. If it goes into accounting, the assumption is that it's paid. Now, I don't know, exactly what the payment process is going to be for your company. Maybe you pay all of your expenses net 60. Maybe it's net 90. Maybe you consider all your expenses like hot potatoes and you want them out of your hands immediately and you pay them upon receipt. Now, that's really up to you. But as far as the system's concerned, if it's exported, it's gone to accounting and therefore it's paid. You have paid the vendor. Because at the very least, it's sitting as a bill to be paid in your accounting system. We can then see the billable value and the invoiced amount. The invoice amount is how much have we actually invoiced the client for this. Now, if you're invoicing this in chunks, these amounts may differ. Billed is then whether or not we've actually billed the client. And green is yes, you have billed the client, and red is no, you have not billed the client for this expense. So you can cross-compare. We have exported and paid this expense of $2,400. We have not invoiced the client for it. I need to invoice the client for this expense. I can produce my PDF for this as well if I want to show this to somebody. Produce my PDF. Has it been billed? No. Has it been, what's the status? Unposted. Here's an exported or paid expense for $2,400 that we have not invoiced. That's for Triple Line Interactive. It was a printing cost for a brochure for our client, Great Atlantic Insurance. So that's a way of reporting on the expenses specifically. The next thing I'm going to show you is how can I see a report more focused on jobs. What are all of our open jobs? What is the estimated expenses on them? What expenses have actually been purchased? Have we invoiced those expenses? So instead of a line by line of all the expenses, I want to look at jobs because maybe we have some jobs where expenses were estimated, but they have not actually been purchased yet. But maybe we've already invoiced them. So I want to get a handle on this. On all my open jobs, I want to get a handle on what kind of expenses are currently sitting out there or coming in, that type of thing. Before I look at that next stage, Emma, question check-in?
Hey, Mark. Thanks for checking in. I don't have anything at the moment for you, but thank you for checking.
No problem. So the process I'm going to show you now is going to be pretty similar to what we just looked at. I'm doing a job find, and in this case, I'm just going to keep it simple. Show me all of my open jobs, everything that's open. Click Find. Now here's a pretty default view for this. I'm seeing the client is for, I'm seeing the name of the job, the type, the status, the due date. I'm seeing the estimated dollar amount, the actual dollar amount, the variance between those, how much we've invoiced, and a balance. That balance is comparing our invoiced amount to the value of the actual work that's been done. Now let's say I want to have a report focused on expenses. Again, I'm going to choose to manage those columns. And I'm going to say, well, I don't want my standard financials. I want something more specific. So I'm going to take those out. What else don't I need? I don't care about the project right now. I don't care about the edit field right now. Everything else we will keep in. I don't need office either. Take that out too. Everything else will keep in there. I'm going to then go into advanced, and I'm going to look at some of my advanced financials. I want to see my estimated external expenses. I want to see my actual external expense dollars. That's representing the billable value, not the cost amount, the billable value. I then want to see my invoiced amount of external expenses. And maybe I even want to see total paid on this right now as well. In fact, I'm going to leave total paid out, but that's a good one. How much of these invoices have they actually paid? I'm going to leave that out for now. Let's reorder these. I'm going to put estimated external expenses, then actual, then invoice externals. Save that. Now, one thing I was noticing in some of my prep for this webinar is that, let's clear this sort too. One thing I was noticing in my prep for this webinar is that this column is getting cut off, and I'm not really sure. It's a big name. I mean, the value itself is showing, which is great, but the name of the column is being cut off, and that's something that I'll have checked on. I'm not sure if that's just a screen real estate factor, but as you can see, there's some free space here. So I'm gonna see what we can do about that. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing all the jobs, the company, the client, name of the job, the type, status, due to the job. I'm then seeing the estimated external expenses, the actual external expenses, and the invoice external expenses. Now, maybe I want to say, okay, well, I don't care about cases where we don't have estimated external expenses. So I'm going to sort by this column. So here are all the jobs sorted by the fact that they have external expense estimated. So here's a job that has $16,250 of external expenses estimated. We've purchased $3,250, and that's the postmark of billable value. We could have included the cost value if we wanted to. I included the billable value, or we could have included both. And then how much have we invoiced? So scrolling down, I mean, here's a case where we have $4,800 estimated, $4,800 actual. That's the total amount of expenses we plan on purchasing, and we have not invoiced for any of it yet. So I can choose now, if I wanted to batch invoice all of these at the same time, or I could drill into this job specifically, dealership signage, and invoice for that expense. But the point here is that I'm choosing to manage columns and adding and subtracting the fields that I need or don't need, organizing them beside each other so that it makes sense, and then producing a report showing me that I have, a $16,000 expense estimated, $3,250 actual, and we have not invoiced for anything. In total, right now, for all open jobs in the agency, we've estimated $91,174 as far as the external expenses that will be coming in. So far, there's $37,000 that has come in, and we've only invoiced for $7,000 of those $37,000 of expenses that have come in. So that was a really useful report for getting a kind of an overall understanding of what's the type of expenses that we're expecting for everything on the go right now, compared to how much have we actually purchased, with it after its billable value, and then how much of that have we actually billed to the client.
Hey, Mark, sorry to interrupt if it's okay. I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, no problem.
Lindsay had just wanted to get a little peek into how this can also dump to Excel. And I just was hoping you could point out that that is an option and how that differs a little bit from what you were showing us just now.
That's a very good point, and that is something that you can do from any list view, of course, is produce this into Excel. And this is going to produce into CSV. Now, one thing I'll mention is that there are different reports you'll find here, and some of these will go into Excel automatically, and then some of them, like the that status expanded summary report, is going to give you a very detailed overview of these expenses in a PDF. But as far as getting our CSV, this is going to give us everything. Now, one thing that we do have planned for the future is the custom columns, the custom sort, the custom order, and everything that you put into that list, the CSV producing the result of that. Currently, the CSV is going to give you everything. And when I say everything, I mean like everything. So when we were looking at that managed columns view and we had all those different financials, notice that these are all here. So I'm looking here and I'm seeing, okay, well, here are our estimated external expenses. Notice how this column here matches to what we have here. I would then say, okay, well, here are our actual external expense costs. That's the column we didn't include. Here are our actual external expense dollars. This value matches up to this value. And then we're actually getting, the same level of detail in the invoiced amount. So here's our invoice external expenses. Here's our invoice subtotal. Here's the total paid. Probably a good thing I didn't include that column because look, it's all zero. Haven't been getting payments on these invoices. And then the creation date of the job as well. But the point is that this will give you everything. So if you're wanting to run some custom reports using these CSV exports, you definitely can. It's just that you're going to have to then choose which columns you want and which you don't after getting it into your CSV.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. I love the CSV. I love that we can get those huge reports of everything. And I've seen some clients get really creative with who are much more talented with Excel than I am and doing all kinds of pivot tables and fancy things with that data. So I think that's a very cool feature. And Lindsay, hopefully that answers your question. And just let me know if it doesn't. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I mean that really covers everything that I had on the docket for today, and I've come in 3 minutes under my promised max time, so I'm
Amazing.
proud of myself.
Well done,
So here,
Mark.
um, I'm just wondering if there are any other questions that we can answer in the few minutes that we have, and I'll be happy to do so. Otherwise, we'll, as we always do, and I'll leave you to mention this, but we'll probably leave this up for a little while longer, will we not?
Yeah, we'll leave the session open for a bit. We'll probably stop chatting pretty soon, and then questions are welcome to be typed in. Mark, maybe while we've got your screen open, could I just get you to hover over help? You don't have to click into anything, but if you could just hover over the word help in your top corner there. I just want to point out, everybody, you will find those resources in your system. Training is going to take you to different training materials. Community forum will take you to our forum where you're welcome to sign up and become a member of that. Even not being a member of the forum, you'll still be able to see all the information there. But if you are a member, you can actually make feature requests and submit questions, communicate with other team or other function point users there. What's new will always take you to just a list view of all the latest and greatest documents, videos, webinars available for sign up, and just in a list order there of the most recently released. And then, of course, you can contact our support team right from the system as well. This is the last one in this little mini series we just did, Mark. So pats on the back to us. We got through all three, and they were all on time. And yeah, you really did a great job presenting. So thanks for that. And then I think we have another series starting in July that will start getting promoted by our marketing team in the next week or so here. And that's all going to be more about sort of under the hood things regarding the admin section, like rates, permissions, alerts, some of that good stuff.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that series. I mean, especially the rates item. That's something that I find a lot of agencies can use some help with, and that particular session is going to be talking about not just the where to find the rate section of the system and what the fields mean, but also how your company should be structuring your rates. And I mean, this is of course very specific to every agency, but one of my goals is to provide some guidance around having your rates reflect the way that you bill, because one theme I'm seeing is that companies are having a really complicated rate structure and a really simple billing structure, and I want to help companies be able to reconcile that and have their rate structure represent the complexity that's actually needed instead of the complexity that is sometimes created to accommodate specific scenarios. So, but I digress. We're going to do more of
I
that.
had to get you, to chat a little bit about that. So I think that's going to
Yeah.
be a great series, Mark, and hopefully everyone's going to be keen to sign up for those. The recording I have recorded today, it will get posted to the What's New area later today or tomorrow once our marketing team can get it on our YouTube channel. And I guess we'll wrap up in a moment here, Mark, but questions, concerns, anyone, feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar panel. We'll leave that open for about another 10 minutes. And then anything else you need, our support team can be reached. Mark and I can both be reached. You can reach out to us generally, consulting at functionpoint.com, support at functionpoint.com, sales at functionpoint.com, I think exists as well. So we're always happy to hear your feedback. If you have suggestions, we should open that up. If people have ideas for webinar series they'd like to see us chat about, then we're happy to hear those as well. But thanks, Mark. Thanks so much for really doing a great job today. I think that was really, really informative. So kudos to you.
No problem. Thank you everyone for your time. And yeah, as Emma said, if you have any suggestions for us for future series, we'd definitely be interested in seeing that.
Yep, absolutely. Fantastic. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll leave it open for a few more minutes for your typed in questions. And thanks again. Have a great rest of the afternoon.